Alternatives and criteria. We'll first start with a brief summary on how to draft your alternatives for your policy analysis. Again, I want to remind you to refer to both textbooks, PAD 348, Welsh and Harris, and the Bardock text for this seminar. You want to start with a long laundry list, right? And where do you get this list? If you conducted your problem statement, exploration, and your environmental scan properly, you already have a list of possible solutions. That means that you've looked at neighboring states or other countries or other police departments or other court jurisdictions that have some impact on the area that you're looking at. So start out with that long list and as a group discuss it. You'll want to aim for a short list of 3 policy alternatives. Now, this may be a refresher from PAD 348. Make sure one of the 3 that you do entertain is the do nothing alternative, which is if we don't do anything, what might occur? We may call that the status quo. It's referred to in many ways, but use that as your baseline and at least one of the 3 options that you entertain in your report. Also, if there are no available options, which I would find that hard to believe, maybe it depends on the problem that you're looking at, design the options for, change. So if you can't find options from your environmental scan, from the literature that you reviewed to define the problem, then you want to design these options from scratch. Again, that's kind of rare, but it's not to say that that won't apply to your group. You'll want to also, per your text, consider the cost. So if there are available budgets, let's say you take an option, you're entertaining an option for California's use of clemency. They will often have the budget public or made available, or it's simple as you sending an email and asking for the budget. And then you can compare that to the budget of concern, maybe it's NYPD or Connecticut, and compare, hey, does NYPD have the bandwidth to actually make this a feasible option? So again, consider the cost. If you want to go through how to do that in detail during my office hours, let me know. Also refer to the information that you've already gathered, right? So this part of the analysis should not be an information gathering process because you've already done that. Here, it's synthesizing the information to try to come up with the most feasible options to address the problem. So now let's talk a little bit about criteria, and I'll show one example before I wrap up. Devising a scoring, rating, or ranking system. That's really what you're trying to do here as you think about the criteria. Often, the literature that you've already covered starts to show what you should use for criteria. So, for example, if you're looking at overpopulation of African Americans in the prison system, then you already know that equity or equality, depending on how you frame your problem statement, should be one of the criteria. If you're comparing jail systems across state lines, then issues of effectiveness and efficiency or sustainability may come into play. Your book provided you with some of the commonly used criteria, but you really should think outside of the box. Don't just adopt the ones that are on the slide and be lazy. Pick 1 or 2, but try to think outside the box. You don't have to use the traditional criteria that we tend to use in public policy. For the report, be sure you clarify what you mean by each of the terms that you deem as criteria for your analysis. So don't just list efficiency, but describe what you mean by efficiency. I'm going to put up one example of what a ranking system might look like. So in the left column, that's labeled criteria, you see the 2 criterion are sustainability and chance of public acceptance, which is huge in terms of sometimes we can have lofty ideas, but if we know the public's not going to buy it, then there's no need of implementing the policy. So that's a pretty solid criteria that you could have. Now, how do you even get at something like that? You could have a group discussion and say within your method section that in a team of 3 to 4 people, we discuss whether this would be, a viable option in terms of public perceptions, and then we ranked it accordingly. And that's fine. I'm not asking you to go out and survey the public, which is what you would do in the real world. But because we're simulating this report, there's no need to do that. Sustainability is what's the likelihood that we can sustain this proposed change over time. So we've got a big budget this year, but we expect a shortfall in 2021-2022. And if that is the case, what you're proposing, if it doesn't have a place in the future budgets, then it may not be all that sustainable. You may end up marking it as a fair option. Now, this particular ranking example that I'm showing you here, you would want to do this for all three of the policy options that you're entertaining. So you just wouldn't do it for one and talk about that one policy. You would do that for all three. You can come up with any table that you deem clear, that will be clear to the reader or your customer, but just don't be too elaborate. It's a short report. So a few additional tips. I actually share these with my graduate students, so hopefully it's a summary of what you're reading in the text and just a bit of a recap of all of the courses you may have taken during your matriculation. So options are potential solutions. Sometimes we call them alternatives. Sometimes policy analysis will refer to it as potential solutions. So just know that all of those terms that you see in that first bullet are common, and get used to them being used interchangeably. And you can feel free to take liberties in your report to do the same. Options are not designed in opposition of each other, and what I mean by that is you can create one option, put it on the list, but maybe there's elements of that option when you move to making your recommendation that you only borrow 2/3 of what's being presented in one option and 1/3 from another option. So you can splice these options later on when you get to the recommendation stage of your analysis. So right now, just draft them as the things that you pull from the atmosphere and get them down on paper. And then you could always entertain dividing up what worked well in one jurisdiction and take that one element and add it to your recommendation. I'll talk more about that in future mini lectures. And this last two slides here, so thinking through, you want to think broad first and then focus. So let's use the example of improving housing options for low-income families because it's just easy, low-hanging fruit. So some possible options is, hey, take the burden off the public dollar and look for outside investors and move your eyes down to the bottom of the screen, recategorize existing houses to be low-income units, right? That's an easy fix as well. You could buy out some of the more affluent folks in the homes and then do the conversion, right? So here we have a long list, and now you want to narrow down that list to 3. For your report, do not go beyond 3 options. I want you to have a minimum of 3, but don't do 4 or 5. You don't really have that kind of time in an abbreviated semester. So again, once you have your options, now I want you to tie them to some type of concept. Reducing public burden is a concept in the literature. Increasing capacity, redistribution, restorative justice, whatever. Tie that option that you now have on your short list to some concept that you've covered in your literature or either through your coursework, or if you need help conceptualizing your policy options, I'm available for that. If you have any questions, reach out to me. Good luck.